We're going to live here as a family, so outsiders need to leave. My mother-in-law slowly and carefully explained this to make sure I understood. Nelda's face turned red while she put her hand over her mouth. Unable to hold back, Nelda burst into laughter, which triggered my mother-in-law to laugh out loud as well. Right after my father passed away, my in-laws seemed to have been lying in wait, and they showed up trying to take over our high-rise apartment. Surrounded by their laughter, I just bowed my head. My shoulders were shaking. Perhaps feeling pity for me, Brad spoke words of comfort. Don't be so down. I let you be by your father's side, so you should have no regrets. Now it's my turn to do the same. Why don't you go visit Helen? Though, I'm not sure if she will be okay with it. I shook my shoulders, holding back my tears. But I couldn't bear it anymore. Suddenly, I lifted my face and started laughing loudly. Ahahaha. I wiped the tears from the corner of my eyes. Do as you please. I've already contacted the lawyer. It's arrogant to emphasize that I did my filial duty. Thinking that they were enjoying themselves behind our backs, deceiving me and my father, anger welled up within me. I was determined to spoil their plans of joy following my father's death. I am Michelle White, 53 years old. My only daughter, Helen, graduated from university this year and started working. I thought I'd be more at ease after finishing raising her, but I'm still worried about Helen, who lives alone in the city. It has been 6 months since she started her job, but she hasn't come home even once. I wonder if Helen is eating properly, I blurted out during dinner with my husband. Tonight's menu was meat and potatoes, Helen's favorite. Eating that, I couldn't help but think of her face. She just started her job, so I know she's busy, but that's exactly why I want to make nutritious meals for her. Brad was right in front of me, but he didn't even glance my way. He clutched his smartphone in his left hand, staring at it while eating. He wasn't focused on the meal, spilling the broth on the table and making unpleasant chewing noises. Brad, are you listening? Brad gave no response. It seemed like my voice never reached his ears, and the concerns I had once again felt like mere monologues, shutting my anxious feelings in. When was the last time Brad and I had a proper conversation? I never thought we would become a couple so lacking in communication when we got married. I met Brad 23 years ago. A friend introduced him to me just before I turned 30. Brad was well-educated and worked for a major company, which made me nervous, but I was immediately taken by his kind, confident smile. It seemed he liked me too, and we started dating. He always planned dates at sophisticated cafes and romantic spots featured in fashion magazines, escorting me each time. I've been really focused on my work and didn't have much luck with women, but meeting you felt as if it were predestined. I can tell you are the one for me. His handsome features made even the sweetest words seem fitting. He was like a prince who openly expressed his love. But I was not a princess. I was just an ordinary office worker. I was anxious about whether I was good enough for someone so elite. While I was having such worries, Brad unexpectedly proposed to me. While it should have been a joyful moment, the fact that we had only known each other for 2 months made me anxious, and I couldn't say yes. When I shared my concerns, he gently embraced me and whispered in my ear, "Marriage doesn't need extra emotions. To me, you are the best." So we got married, and I felt like the happiest woman in the world. That was until the day after our wedding when our new married life began. "Michelle, are you really going to feed me this?" Brad said coldly as he looked at me, setting the breakfast on the table. His face was very cold, and he clearly seemed in a bad mood, though I couldn't understand why. It was our first day living together, so I had put extra effort into the cooking. I prepared a lavish breakfast, including an omelet with crispy bacon, yogurt parfait with berries and oats, and freshly baked scones right from the oven. I just need coffee and bread in the morning. It's hard to read the newspaper with anything else. Ah, I see. You're the type who doesn't think about efficiency and enjoys a leisurely, inefficient meal in the morning. How that figures. Brad's attitude had changed completely since yesterday. I was so surprised by his words that I was left speechless. He stared at my shocked face. "That foolish look on your face, I like it," he said with a grin. However, he left the house without touching the breakfast. Left alone with the untouched meal, I had no choice but to stand there. I had planned to take the day off work to tidy up the house, but I was so shocked by his words that I couldn't move, neither physically nor emotionally. Around 9 a.m., the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, my mother and sister-in-law Nelda entered the room without a greeting. Michelle, it seems you tried to impress Brad with your cooking this morning, but that was futile. Brad is not a simple man who can be manipulated with food," my mother-in-law continued without pausing for breath. Brad always eats bread at home and goes to work as usual. It's unfortunate for him, especially so early in the marriage. Nelda grimaced as if enjoying the situation. It seemed Brad had stopped by his parents' house before going to work this morning. A minor misunderstanding between us had been exposed to his family, and I felt embarrassed. Nelda looked around the room and sighed dramatically. Mom, look, there are still moving boxes in the corner of the room. Michelle is really sloppy, isn't she? Oh, I was just about to clean those up, I replied desperately, but my mother-in-law immediately dismissed it. No excuses. Look, you're just an ordinary office worker who is all talk and no action. You're not a good match for Brad, not at all. You should be grateful that he accepted someone like you. My mother-in-law sat down. Now, make some tea. You should at least be able to serve tea without being told, she hurried me. I quickly made the tea and offered it to them. After taking a sip, my mother-in-law snorted with laughter. This is terrible. The tea is too weak. For someone who works as an office worker serving tea, this is quite poor. Both my mother-in-law and Nelda slurped their scalding tea noisily. I wonder if Brad is truly satisfied with such a girl. Well, maybe that's just what you get from a daughter-in-law. Brad does like you, Michelle. Despite their insinuating comments, I couldn't find the courage to speak up in front of my husband's family. Nelda lived at home. She was single and surrounded herself with idle merchandise. She wasn't even a regular office worker like me, and she even recently quit her part-time job at a supermarket. Despite being hurt by her remarks, I had no room to argue. I had hoped for a sweet newlywed life, but my husband scorned me, and my mother-in-law and Nelda often made snide remarks. This was not the life I had hoped for. I couldn't consider divorce right after getting married. Half a year later, while I was troubled, I became pregnant and eventually gave birth to Helen. The blatant nastiness from my in-laws decreased. It wasn't because they were too cruel to berate a mother in front of a young child. Rather, it was because Nelda became obsessed with the popular Korean wave. My mother-in-law also became busy with watching TV dramas from morning to night and going on pilgrimages to drama sites together. As a result, they showed less interest in me and my daughter. It's sad that Helen didn't feel her grandmother's love, but maintaining a proper distance had somehow kept our household calm. Brad seemed satisfied as long as I fully understood and supported his pace of life. Time flew by, and before I knew it, we'd been married for 23 years. While it can't be said that I am extremely happy, we have been living a stable and troubled life. I thought time would just quietly continue to pass. However, Brad surprisingly suggested something new. How about we live together now? I was so surprised that I dropped my spoon. Brad's voice, which I hadn't heard in a while, seemed almost like a hallucination. What? I gasped, feeling the blood drain from my face. I thought he meant living with my mother-in-law, but I was mistaken. Isn't your father going to rebuild his house? I thought, why not live together then? I had mentioned my father's house situation to Brad a few days ago but didn't get any reaction at that time. However, it seemed he had been listening after all. It's ridiculous that he wants to rebuild his house in his 80s, even if the house is aging. Well, that's probably just an excuse. He surely wants to bring you closer by building a new house. Your mother passed away a few years ago and your father is getting old. Living alone must be tough. While confused by the unexpected suggestion, I desperately tried to understand. But you know, I'd prefer to live in an apartment, not a detached house. It's us who are going to be living there long-term, not your father, so I hope this bit of selfishness can be excused in exchange for living together. Without mocking my stunned silence, Brad continued in a gentle tone. Also, I'm worried about you, Michelle. You worry too much about Helen. Now that you're finally free from childcare, it's time to start the second phase of your life. Changing environments will help refresh your mood. Thank you, Brad. Although he might seem aloof, he had been considering my feelings. Tears welled up in my eyes. I immediately talked to my father about moving in together, and he was very happy and couldn't thank Brad enough. Once the decision was made, Brad acted quickly, as if he had been eyeing it from the start, and contracted a new high-rise apartment. Even though Brad works at a major company, going for a high-rise apartment was surprising. I only receive a monthly allowance for living expenses and am not familiar with our savings, but when I checked the market price of the apartment, my head started to spin. Now that Helen is independent, I don't feel like living in a family-type apartment anymore. I want to start the second phase of my life. Since it's going to be our last home, I think it's okay to indulge a little. It seemed my father had already agreed and plans had been moving forward without my knowledge. Although I felt a bit anxious, living in the high-rise apartment was actually very comfortable. This beautiful new home was supposed to be the start of a fulfilling second phase of my life. However, my relationship with Brad gradually deteriorated. There was some conversation until the purchase of the new home, but afterwards, the previous silence returned. Additionally, his overtime and business trips increased, and he barely came home. May Brad can't relax at home because my father is there? My father looked sad and seemed to have lost his energy, confining himself to the small space. Dad, do you no longer go to your ballroom dancing classes or do karaoke? It seems you haven't gone since we moved. I've decided to quit. Why? Well, it's fine. I get to spend time with you. That's enough for me. My father lost his hobbies and he seemed to have aged rapidly. Even when I encouraged him to go out, he oddly only went for walks late at night. Then, just a year after we started living together, my father was rushed to the hospital due to an illness. While preparing for his hospitalization, I found a passbook hidden among his clothes when I opened his drawer. It felt wrong to go through my father's personal items, but something felt off. When I opened the passbook, a surprising truth was revealed. Dad, what is this all about? I rushed to the hospital and confronted my father directly. However, he just smiled. Spending time with Michelle was the greatest happiness for me. I'm grateful to Brad for that. But actually, there's something about him. My father's words shocked me, and I couldn't hide my disturbance. Quietly, my father took my hand in his. And a few days later, my father passed away quietly. When I contacted Brad, he responded with a bright tone. Oh, that was quicker than I thought. Afterwards, a disaster that seemed to cut through my grief struck. As I was looking for a photo for the memorial service at home, the front door opened. I thought it was Brad returning, but I heard several footsteps. Can we put these boxes here? The newcomers were movers, carrying cardboard boxes. Behind them appeared my mother-in-law. Oh, Michelle, you're here too? Nelda and Brad were with her. As box after box was brought in, I asked in astonishment, what are these boxes for? Can't you see? A tea-serving office lady seems to lack insight. Nelda and I are moving in. My mother-in-law answered nonchalantly. She and Nelda exchanged glances and laughed together. Nelda added pointedly, we express our condolences. Yes, our condolences. Now, could you please leave? As I stood bewildered, Brad, who had been silent, suddenly laughed. Michelle doesn't get it, explain it to her in simpler terms. Then, my mother-in-law began to explain slowly. We're going to live here as a family, so outsiders need to leave. She slowly and carefully explained this to make sure I understood. Nelda's face turned red while she put her hand over her mouth. Unable to hold back, Nelda burst into laughter, which triggered my mother-in-law to laugh out loud as well. Now that the troublesome old man is gone, this house belongs to us. Their laughter echoed through the home that had once promised a new chapter in my life, now turning into a scene of betrayal and loss. Surrounded by the laughter of my mother-in-law and her company, I bowed my head as my shoulders were shaking. Perhaps feeling pity for me, Brad offered some words of comfort. Don't be so down. I let you be by your father's side, so you should have no regrets. Now it's my turn to do the same. Why don't you go visit Helen? Though, I'm not sure if she will be okay with it. I was shaking, holding back tears, but I couldn't bear it anymore. Suddenly, I lifted my face and started laughing loudly. Ahahaha. I wiped the tears from the corners of my eyes. Please do as you like. I've already contacted a lawyer. Brad and the others twisted their faces in surprise. Has she gone mad? How creepy. Ignoring their reactions, I left the house. Their presumption of doing me a favor by allowing me to fulfill my filial duties was offensive. Thinking that they had been enjoying themselves behind our backs, deceiving both me and my father, anger welled up within me. I was determined to spoil their plans of joy following my father's death. For the time being, I put them aside and made sure my father's funeral went smoothly without any disturbances. Of course, none of Brad's family attended. After successfully sending off my father, my revenge began. I did not return home but stayed in a business hotel. Then, on the following Sunday, I went back to the high-rise apartment, my resolve firm. Using the keys I had, I unlocked the entrance and led many relatives into the apartment. Nelda, dressed in casual home clothes, let out a shriek of surprise. Yikes, was her ugly cry. Brad and my mother-in-law frowned in astonishment. The relatives I brought with me quickly began packing items from the room into boxes. I'm here to organize some belongings, I announced as I entered. Initially, my mother-in-law responded with a nod, but her demeanor quickly changed, snapping, "Why suddenly? This is absurd. It's absurd? But you and Nelda moved in here suddenly without a word to me, didn't you?" I retorted. While my mother-in-law and Nelda were both angered and shaken, Brad quickly caught on. "Hey, don't touch our things," he shouted at the relatives who had begun to pack not just my personal items but also the furniture and appliances. Temporarily confused, my relatives halted their packing, but I urged them to continue. "Don't worry, these are my belongings, please take them to the new house. And their stuff to the storage unit," I directed them. My relatives nodded and continued to pack everything in the room. "What are you doing without permission?" Brad exclaimed. "Without permission? Isn't that exactly what you did?" I snapped back. As my relatives moved back and forth, a man in a suit appeared. "This gentleman is here from a real estate agency to appraise the property today." I introduced him. "Appraisal?" Brad reacted in shock, too bewildered even to accept the business card offered to him. "Yes, can't you see? Think about it a little, Brad. I'm planning to put this apartment on the market." Brad, my mother-in-law, and Nelda were all wide-eyed with surprise. Unable to hold back, I laughed aloud at their dumbfounded expressions. "Why are you surprised? This house was purchased by my father and you all have no right to live here." Meanwhile, my mother-in-law, in a panic, insisted, "What do you mean? Wasn't it just that Michelle's father helped with the down payment?" Pressing Brad for answers. It seemed she was under the misconception that my father had only contributed a small amount of money. Brad remained silent. As the room quieted down, I explained the situation. I truly appreciated Brad suggesting that we live with my father, but it turns out he was just after my father's assets. In reality, Brad had persuaded my father to buy the apartment without my knowledge, and that was the hidden condition of our cohabitation. My father had exhausted his savings to purchase the apartment. What's the problem? It's smarter for us to buy the apartment than for an elderly person to rebuild a house unnecessarily. It's a wise investment. In the end, Michelle did her filial duty, so no complaints are needed. Indeed. I am thankful for the time I spent with my father. See, Brad's confidence was revolting. Remembering my father's bank account pained me. Initially, it was emptied for the apartment purchase, and thereafter, as soon as the pension came in, it was immediately withdrawn. My father's decreased enjoyment of his hobbies was because he no longer had the financial freedom. Not only the savings, but you were also withdrawing the pension as living expenses. How greedy can you get? Unable to bear my direct gaze, Brad looked away. However, now I'm glad that my father bought this place. As his only daughter, I inherit this home and can put it on the market right away. It would have been troublesome if you had contributed even $10,000 to make it a joint ownership. So, what was that about outsiders should leave? Don't make me laugh. You're the ones who need to leave this house. To cover Brad's embarrassed face, my mother-in-law stepped forward. Yes, sorry. It was really wrong of us. My son has caused trouble. Is that enough? We're sorry for using your beloved father-in-law's money. But he's passed away. Why blame Brad for something a deceased person was involved in? Michelle, you really are persistent. My mother-in-law had completely shifted gears, realizing the direness of the situation while Nelda approached me. Who said you are an outsider? Stop this ridiculous joke. We are family. We came because we thought you'd be lonely after your father-in-law's death. Why don't we live together nicely? The audacity of them acting like family after trying to drive me out was beyond infuriating. I don't even feel angry anymore. Brad, what do you think? Am I an outsider? Are you thinking of divorce? Brad answered in almost an inaudible voice. No, I'm not planning to divorce. I love only you, Michelle, so please don't say anything about selling the house. The Brad who had once looked down on me was no longer there. Seeing Brad hang his head in shame, I couldn't understand why I had ever been accommodating to him. You love me? That's clearly a lie. After all, you're just after the house I inherited, I said provocatively. No, I truly love you, Brad retorted. Stop it, you're making me sick. How dare you say those words after having an affair? That's shameless. At that moment, I confronted him with several photos. They were pictures of Brad entering a hotel with another woman, looking intimate. Brad had no room for denial. What is this? He stammered. These are pictures I got from Dad, I informed him. From that old fool. Brad hadn't been coming home and was just demanding money. Dad was suspicious all along. I was shocked because I hadn't doubted you. When you spend a lot of time with someone, you don't notice the abnormalities. I don't know how long you've been cheating, but I feel like all the time I spent with you was wasted. It really hurts. My father, unfamiliar with using his mobile phone's camera, had taken several photos of Brad's infidelity. He had debated whether to tell me, but had collected evidence during his supposed night walks. Just before he died, he told me about the infidelity along with the financial issues. Let's get a divorce, I initiated. But Michelle, Brad tried to interject, but I cut him off. Do you think you have a choice? Brad clenched his teeth. My mother-in-law clung to Brad's arm, whispering accusations. This isn't what we planned. We thought Michelle was just a simple office lady that we could easily manipulate. Confirming that I was chosen as a marital partner as merely a housekeeper and understanding why Brad's attitude cooled after the marriage. It turned out that the father of the so-called housekeeper was financially well off, seen as useful, and exploited similarly. An office lady should be obedient. Why are you resisting? You used to be so quiet, and now you've become clever as you've gotten older. This is marital fraud. Brad was deceived. My mother-in-law cried as she clung to Brad. It pained me to corner a crying mother-in-law, but I couldn't remain silent any longer. You keep mocking me as just an office lady, but isn't that all in the past? Dragging decades-old issues into the modern days with such outdated views is extremely backward. It's like you're declaring yourself outdated. Don't you find that embarrassing? My mother-in-law was visibly angry. How dare you, a mere daughter-in-law, speak like that? She retorted. The atmosphere was tense, the reality of our fractured relationships starkly apparent. The house, once a symbol of familial unity and potential prosperity, had become an arena of betrayal and exposed secrets, underscoring the vast gulf of misunderstanding and manipulation that had underpinned what I once believed was a loving relationship. Brad, with tears in his eyes, raised his voice in defiance. Yeah, you couldn't live without me. He trembled like a small dog trying to stand its ground. Brad, you know I work too. Maybe my salary wasn't enough for the high rent or for Helen's education expenses. But tears spilled from Brad's eyes, yet I continued. I can earn enough to cover my own living expenses. It was tough to balance raising a kid and work, but I'm really glad I kept going. Thank you for everything, Brad. Goodbye. My mother-in-law glared at me with fury, but as Nelda tried to intervene, my mother-in-law ignored her and screamed her true feelings. A daughter-in-law doesn't need judgment or money. Being stupid is enough. Her voice echoed in the now empty room, stripped of furniture. Nelda collapsed to the floor. Brad looked up to the heavens. The subsequent disputes were intense, but eventually, the house was sold and the divorce from Brad was finalized. When I filed for division of assets due to his infidelity, Brad quietly agreed. Help me, I almost have no savings. While he had been wasting money, it turned out that his salary was much less than expected. Despite working at a large company with a high education, he had not advanced to a useful position even after turning 50, was not entrusted with significant tasks, and hardly did any overtime. As a result, his take-home pay was nearly the same as a new employee. Of course, his claims of being away on business or working overtime were lies. He was actually having an affair. That's why he broke down whenever we talked about money. What exactly had Brad been doing at his job? The thought that he might have been doing nothing more than making copies and serving tea was almost laughable. I made sure to receive a substantial amount in division of assets from Brad without mercy. Just when everything seemed settled and I felt relieved, only 3 months after the divorce, Brad reached out to me, suggesting we get back together, which made me shiver. Michelle, won't you start over with me from the beginning? Previously, Brad had been proud of his job, but after our divorce, he moved into a cheap 2-room apartment with his mother and Nelda. The reality of his situation and his attempt at reconciliation felt both pitiful and infuriating. My journey had brought me too far to consider turning back to a man who had revealed himself so thoroughly. Brad's unexpectedly low salary shocked his mother, who had been counting on his high income. After several loud arguments in their thin-walled apartment, Brad left his mother and Nelda behind. Feeling mismatched with his company's expectations, he resigned from his job, despite deciding to start a new life with his affair partner. Once his financial instability became apparent, he was abandoned and eventually returned to me. Seeing Brad completely misunderstand his own situation was disheartening. When I demanded property division from his affair partner, she was furious, accusing Brad of being with her for money, yet there was never any future in their relationship. I cannot possibly get back together with you. I firmly refused him. Brad left, deeply hurt, but the problems didn't stop there. We have no money. please, can you help us? Or at least lend us some? Brad's mother and Nelda pleaded with me. It seemed Brad had returned to his mother's side. Despite claiming to be an elite, he spent his nights living lavishly in the city, quickly accumulating debt which he seemed to ignore. With no choice left, his mother and Nelda began working part-time jobs, though it seemed to have little effect. I don't have money to lend to others, I told them. In a normal family, I might have considered helping them in times of trouble, but they had unmistakably treated me as an outsider. I had spent too long playing the role of the good daughter-in-law. Since the divorce, I've relished a life without obligations to anyone. Moreover, my small apartment, where I now live alone, isn't lonely because Helen frequently visits. It's a stark contrast to a home with a grandiose father and a somber mother. Mom, you've really changed, Helen noted. Yes, perhaps Grandpa protected me in his way, giving me the courage to change, I said as I handed her freshly made meat and potatoes, her eyes lighting up with joy. I'm so happy. I love your meat and potatoes. Helen savored a bite, her eyes narrowing in contentment. This new chapter of my life, free from the shadows of manipulation and deceit, filled me with a profound sense of peace and autonomy. The sense of happiness that comes from being cherished by someone fills my heart, even giving me a sense of purpose in life. I am inspired to continue transforming myself, hoping to become strong enough to protect my daughter. Don't worry, the taste of the meat and potatoes hasn't changed, I assured her. Helen tilted her head, puzzled, but seemed relieved. I hope for these peaceful moments to last forever, a sanctuary of love and tranquility where we can both thrive, free from the tumult of the past.
Dad's inheritance belongs to your brother. I can't believe someone would come to a funeral just for the inheritance. Please go home soon. Yes. Renounce the inheritance and disappear. At my father's funeral, I was unfairly targeted by my mother and brother. The inheritance was. There's no way I misheard it, right? I never intended to inherit anything in the first place. It's okay to give it up, right? Don't say it was a lie later, okay? Relieved, I did as I was told and left the place. Little did I know that my decision at that time would influence the fate of my family. I am 38-year-old Jenny. I love cats so much that I could almost say it's my hobby. When my daughter was still little, I had many concerns and hesitated to get a cat. But now that she is an elementary school student, I can take care of my beloved cats without worries. He. Currently, while raising a child and 3 cats, I am enjoying my days, but I was a timid child in my youth. This was due to my family environment. I am part of a family of 4 with my parents and a brother who is 2 years older than me. Hearing this, you might imagine a warm and happy family, but that was not the case. My brother Kevin was very skilled and quick-witted. He truly deserved to be called a genius. He could understand lessons just by listening a little, and didn't need to study much. He was also physically gifted. In elementary school, energetic and athletic kids tend to be popular, and my athletic brother was well-liked by everyone. Moreover, he had a friendly personality that made it easy to get along with anyone, and he was also liked by the teachers. His existence caused me great inferiority. My mother loved my genius brother very much and always bragged about him to people around her. It felt odd to treat children like her own creations. But my mother, a toxic parent, didn't care about such things. And she always concluded her stories with, "But my daughter is a failure. I was neither smart nor good at sports. I looked very ordinary, just a normal girl who could be found anywhere. I was like an extra, blending into the background. I had no notable features, and I probably wasn't of any interest to my mother. Whenever something came up, she would compare me to my brother, saying, 'Your brother is really smart, but you have no talents, or all the good qualities went to your brother.' Later, I learned that my mother had never wanted a girl. When she found out I was a girl, she was deeply disappointed, which I heard from my drunken father. After knowing this, I finally understood why my mother was so cold towards me. My birth was not desired by my mother. Kevin, let's have a snack. I made cupcakes today. Mom's homemade ones? Can I eat a lot? I made a lot. so eat as much as you want. My mother and brother were having a pleasant conversation. There was only a plate for my brother on the table, and I couldn't find one for me. Mom, I want to eat a cupcake too. There's none for you, Jenny. Your test scores were terrible, so study more before you eat snacks. Why? Do you want to complain? No. My relationship with my mother was far from that of a parent and child, more like that of a boss and a subordinate at a company. Jenny, you left the game here again. My mother picked up the game console, raising her voice in anger. It seems I had left it on the sofa. I don't have a game console. That's Kevin's. Oh, if it's Kevin's, then there's no problem. My mother stopped scolding after saying that, and I was surprised. No matter how much I asked, my mother wouldn't buy me a game console. On the contrary, my brother didn't even have to ask, she bought him one simply because it's popular. I was upset that my mother mistook me for having a game console, but more than that, I was frustrated by her attitude that anything was okay if it was my brother's doing. It felt like my mother was especially strict with me. I was probably an easy target for her to vent her stress. Although my brother was a prodigy, sociable, and loved by those around him, at home, he was just a selfish child. When something upset him, he would throw a tantrum, shouting or sulking. Even his favorite food would land on the floor, and he'd say, "I don't like it," depending on his mood. When we lost a team sport during PE, he would blame me, saying, "My team lost because of her." It's because she was on my team. Even when my brother was being selfish, my mother never scolded him. Kevin is having a hard time too. She would take his side and accept whatever he said, completely under his control. Even my mother must have felt the burden of dealing with my brother's selfishness. As a result, she vented her stress on me. On the other hand, my father, possibly because he was a son-in-law, couldn't stand up to my mother at all. Initially, my father would intervene when my brother acted recklessly, but as my mother yelled at him, he gradually stopped saying anything. He protected me only when I was attacked. Honestly, if you ask me if I loved my father, I couldn't simply say yes. I understood he was kind, but even as a child, I felt he needed to take a bit more responsibility for bringing the family together. There was an event at elementary school, and I was preparing for it, which made me a bit late coming home. I hadn't done anything to be scolded for, nor was I hours late. I was just about 20 minutes later than usual. Yet, I'm home. You're late. My mother looked at me with accusing eyes the moment I entered, without even a word of welcome, and I felt something was wrong. Apparently, she was in a bad mood. At times like these, no matter the reason, my mother invariably blamed me. I'm sorry. I was late because I was helping with preparations for our school's event. Even though I thought it was pointless, I ended up explaining honestly. Perhaps as a child, I harbored a faint hope that if she knew I was fully committed to a school event, she would understand. But my short-tempered mother was not one to be reasoned with. "Do you know what time it is?" When asked, I looked at the clock and answered, 4 p.m. It is, but it's almost 5 p.m. You know the curfew is at 5 p.m., right? I was shocked and lost for words at my mother's comment. There was still an hour until 5 p.m. What was she talking about? I'm shocked that you would do something so selfish. Wait a minute. I was just practicing for a play in class. Don't make excuses. I'm sorry. Next weekend, you said you were going out with friends, right? Yes. Cancel it. I won't allow you to go out for a while. Why not? Do you intend to talk back? Being glared at menacingly by my mother, I became unable to say anything more. I eventually had no choice but to do as my mother said and called to cancel my plans with my friends. My friends were angry, saying we had already booked the movie, and my mom had even taken the day off to drive us. Because there were hardly any bus services, a friend's mother had agreed to drive us. Considering it was a workday and she had taken time off specifically for us, it was understandable why my friend was angry. Because of this incident, I drifted apart from that friend. Rather, she said, I can't believe you anymore, and stopped talking to me. I could only tell her I had to cancel because my mom said no, so they probably thought my family was a hassle. It felt reasonable that she would want to keep her distance. Furthermore, since my friend talked about this incident with other friends, I became known as Jenny who doesn't keep promises, and I ended up with fewer friends. It wasn't just this incident that caused me to have fewer friends. Since that day, my mother had been commanding me, don't play around after school, come straight home. You're forbidden from going out with friends. Why did I listen to my mother so much, you ask? A primary school student can't do much against their parents. I knew I couldn't even live without relying on them. I don't know who else I could turn to. I had defied my mother many times, but every time there would be no meal for me. Even when she said that's fine with a laugh, the next day my room would be trashed. The sheets would get torn apart, the head of a doll I cherished was removed, and I even found my treasured snow globe was broken, its contents scattered on the floor. Of course, it was my mother who did it. Once, I was yelled at just for calling her mother. All my friends had stopped calling their mom's mom, so I tried the same. It's so old-fashioned to call me anything but mom, she said, and slapped my cheek. Yet my brother calls her mother and doesn't get scolded. My mother could suddenly become angry at unexpected times, and honestly, I didn't know how to deal with her. As a primary school student, I didn't have the courage or strength to stand up to such a mother. Inside the cage called home, all I could do was endure. Living while being mindful of my mother's mood became the norm, and years passed like this. My brother successfully passed the entrance exams to one of the top schools in the state. With that, my mother began to spoil him even more than before. When my brother said he wanted to work part-time because there's something I want to buy, she would increase his allowance to $1,000 and buy him an expensive instrument for the brass band he joined, allowing him to do whatever he wanted. When it was discovered that she had taken out loans for my brother, my father was furious. But my mother showed no signs of remorse. It's an amount I can repay with my part-time job earnings, so it's not a problem, she justified. My father was so appalled by her statement that he gave up, saying, "Do whatever you want." A truly admirable brother would try to be independent without relying on his parents. But my brother's selfishness only escalated. Whenever he said he wanted a license or clothes, my mother would give him money each time. Not content with a monthly allowance of $1,000, my brother started asking for more. It seems he wanted to create an image of a rich, smart person by generously distributing money around him. It's often said that there's a fine line between genius and foolishness, and I felt that description perfectly suited my brother. My mother was obsessed with the idea that he'll be a big shot in the future, so we're just investing for that future when it came to spending money on my brother. Now I'd like to say it's like investing in a loss. While my mother showered my brother with much love, it seems she still wasn't very interested in me. She completely forgot about an important three-way meeting before my high school entrance exams, and she also forgot to pay my high school entrance fee. Luckily, my father handled it quickly, and it worked out, but if his response had been a little later, I wouldn't have been able to attend high school. My mother explained it away as an oversight, but even that I doubt. Since I couldn't work part-time in high school, I planned to get a job after graduation, and at 18, I was able to leave home. My mother said, "If you beg on your knees, I might pay for college, but if you can't do that, figure it out yourself," but I had no such intention. Feeling that staying in school would keep me tied to this house, I never intended to go to college in the first place. After all, unlike my academically gifted brother, I was average in studies and sports. The desire to leave home, though challenging as a high school graduate, outweighed my interest in further studies. Even now, I feel that decision was correct. After that, I started working at a bread factory. Though I planned to live alone once I saved enough money, I was able to move out at the time of my high school graduation because there was company housing available. Lately, my brother has been causing trouble at home, possibly due to mental pressure. My mother, who continued to indulge him, now seemed stressed by my brother's tantrums, lashing out not just at me but also at my father. I wanted to leave that home as soon as possible. The company housing was old, and a troublesome supervisor lived next door. It wasn't a very comfortable environment, but still, it was better than my parents' home. However, I didn't intend to live in the company housing forever. Aiming to advance my career, I started studying for a medical office certification while working at the factory. That effort paid off, and I was able to change jobs in my 20s. I started my dream job in medical administration at a nearby hospital. I was even discussing marriage with my boyfriend David, but then, issues I had avoided came up. "We have to go and greet your parents too." The moment my fiancé David said that, I froze. I didn't want to take him to my house. It's not necessary to greet my family. David's parents are enough, I think. That won't do. I'm marrying their precious daughter, after all. No, my family isn't like that. David thought I was joking and laughed it off. What's that supposed to mean? But I couldn't laugh. What? You're not joking. I haven't told you anything about my family, have I? I made up my mind and told him everything about my family. Though I was anxious that my family issues might lead to a breakup, I couldn't keep it hidden any longer. After hearing my story, he understood the situation and suggested, "Even so, let's visit your parents at least once." Why? To be honest, if they're that troublesome, they might complain later if we get married without telling them. That made sense. For now, we'd just greet them, and if they opposed, we'd think about it then. That was his plan. My family was indifferent to me, so they probably wouldn't oppose the marriage, but I still felt uneasy. Moreover, I hadn't returned home since I started working, and I really didn't want to see them. Reluctantly, I called home. "Hello, it's Jenny." I spoke nervously when my displeased mother's voice came through the phone, saying Jenny. I wondered who would answer, but of course it was my mother. "It's sudden, but I have someone I want you to meet soon." "Are you getting married?" "That's right." "I see. We don't have money, so handle the wedding yourselves." "What?" "We need money for Kevin." "Don't expect us to give you any. Don't talk about troublesome things like a wedding ceremony. Just get married on your own. I don't mind." With that, my mother abruptly hung up the phone. I hadn't planned to have a wedding ceremony or invite them anyway. I should have been happy that I didn't need to visit, but being told off like that definitely annoyed me. But what did she mean by "we don't have money"? My brother should be working after graduating from college, yet they still needed money for him. Is my mother still letting him do whatever he wants? It's still the same strange family. Remembering the past made me irritated all over again. For now, I told David about the phone call, and we decided, then let's just get married on our own. It was a few years later. I received news from a relative that my father had passed away. Why did the contact come from a relative? There had been no calls from my family. Perhaps the relatives contacted me out of concern since I wasn't attending the wake. My family home was out of the state, so I couldn't make it to the wake, but if I hurried, I might be able to make it to the funeral tomorrow. I was bewildered by the sudden event, but I rushed to the funeral venue. "Why did you have to die now?" "I was just looking into increasing your life insurance. Why couldn't you read between the lines and wait a bit longer?" My mother cried, hitting my father's coffin. Father had been ill, so I thought it unlikely he'd qualify for good insurance, but I doubted my mother would understand. "Actually, you're the one that's out of line. From what I saw with the staff having to restrain her, she hardly looked like a grieving widow." My brother was also crying out loudly, "What about my debts?" It seemed that neither was mourning the loss of my father but rather lamenting over money. What a terrible family. The relatives seemed to feel the same, watching the two of them with expressions of shock and disappointment. "Jenny, isn't it? Why are you here? We didn't contact you." The moment my mother noticed me, she rushed over, surprised. My brother followed her. I got a call from my uncle. I can't believe you didn't visit the hospital but show up at the funeral, my mother yelled at me. She continued to scream without regard for the eyes around us. Dad's inheritance is for your brother. I can't believe you'd come to the funeral for the inheritance. Please go back home. What? I was so shocked by my mother's unbelievable words that I was left stunned. Weren't you the one who hid the fact that Dad was fighting an illness? Why must I be accused of being here for the inheritance when I only tried to attend his funeral? I won't believe anything you say. You're just a high school graduate, and your salary must be low, right? You work in a factory, right? Your salary isn't good, so of course you want Dad's inheritance. It seems my employment at the factory wasn't updated in their information. Perhaps it's also my fault for not communicating anything. That's right. Renounce your inheritance and disappear. When my brother yelled that, I couldn't help but retort. Really? Are you serious? Sure. Perhaps surprised by my response, both my brother and mother were taken aback. So, that's how it is, my brother muttered. Mother also replied indecisively, so that's that. Well, it seems I'm a bother here, so I'll go home. I'll prepare the necessary documents for renouncing the inheritance myself. As I said this, my mother asked, Do you have enough money? Money? I have enough if it's just $50, right? I can handle that much. My response had my brother and mother exchanging looks. With a complicated expression, they murmured almost inaudibly, I see. Do they not even have $50? I briefly felt uneasy, but honestly, it was none of my business. As they wished, I decided to proceed with the inheritance renunciation. A few days later. What? When I checked my phone in the morning, there were dozens of missed calls and voicemails from my brother. It was creepy, and then another call from my brother came. I thought I had hung up, but I accidentally pressed the button to answer. No way. Reluctantly, I put the phone to my ear. Don't mess with me, you jerk. I was startled by the same angry shouting that he had at home and accidentally dropped my phone. Thinking it was bad, I hurriedly picked it up. You can hear me, right? Why did you keep quiet? What are you talking about? I didn't understand. What was my brother talking about? Why didn't you tell me that Dad had debts? You didn't know. I was taken aback by my brother's words. Exactly. How did you find out about the debts? It's not that big of a deal. Dad told me a few months ago. He told me everything when I visited him at the hospital. Father already knew he didn't have much time left. Because she's useless, don't tell her my mother had decided on her own not to tell me that my father had been hospitalized, and she had told my father to forget about me. But my father wanted to see me, and at the last minute, confided his condition and asked me to come to the hospital. That's when he confessed that he had taken on a debt for a junior colleague, which was now overdue. How meddlesome could he be, taking on someone else's debt? He was just too kind. Moreover, this colleague had borrowed money from my father, claiming he had no living expenses, but later it turned out he had overspent at nightclubs. As a result, the colleague divorced and ran away at night, leaving my father to cover the payments. But that wasn't all. Things will get tough for the family if this doesn't sell. My father was approached by his boss, who made him buy a lot of strange water. This water was supposed to remove fatigue, improve luck, and lead life in a better direction. Let's be honest, even if it worked, it would only be a placebo. Father realized it was a scam, but he bought the water out of sympathy for his boss. He should have sold it to someone else to make profit, but due to his nature, he couldn't bring himself to sell such a product to others, and he ended up in debt. Since I left home, I was told not to inherit the estate under any circumstances, so I've been wondering how to tell you guys about renouncing the inheritance. But on the day of the funeral, you told me to give it up, which was just perfect. It made things easier for me. I spoke in a cheery voice. Then, my brother raised his voice. If you knew, you should have told us too. You're awful. I didn't think you guys didn't know. After all, you were cherished by both Dad and Mom. You've lived at home all this time, you must have known about the debt long ago. Are you kidding me? Stop messing around. You have no idea what kind of life we've been leading. My brother was shouting almost frantically. I could hear footsteps stomping in the background over the phone. What kind of life? You went to college and was smart enough to get a decent job? No. I haven't got a job anywhere. Mom said it was okay not to work. Seriously. I was astonished that he was still saying such childish things. His selfish nature had worsened because our mother never disciplined him. My brother was ranting. It's not my fault, but it was clear that he was in the wrong. At that moment, I heard my mother's voice on the phone saying, "Let me talk." "Hello, it's Mom." "Yes." I still get nervous in front of my mother, and a strange anxiety spreads inside me. Calm down. I haven't done anything to be yelled at, so if I just act normal, everything will be fine. Why didn't you tell me about Dad's debt? That's awful. You could have mentioned it at the funeral. Even if we knew, it's common sense to tell us just in case. That might be true. Do I really need to do that? I don't live with you. If you had paid a little more attention to Dad, you would have known. It's not my fault, it's your own doing for only looking out for Kevin. I'm so done. You always say such unkind things. Just listen to me for once. My mother was getting angrier, and her voice was getting louder. Remembering past events, I felt my body tense up, but then my husband, who was sleeping beside me, woke up and squeezed my hand, asking, "Are you okay?" I couldn't explain in detail since I was on the phone, but I smiled a little and mouthed, "I'm fine. It's okay. I have him. I think I've listened to you, Mom, more than Kevin has. I can't just keep listening to what you say anymore. Maybe it's time you realize that it's wrong to think children should always listen to their parents. What are you saying? Who do you think gave birth to you? I never intended to have a daughter like you. Well, I never asked to be born either. Don't say such things just because you gave birth to me. Arguing about it won't help. So what should I do? I'm already struggling to pay off my own debts. Dad's debt can be resolved by renouncing it. You're not going to say you don't have the money for the procedure, right? I can pay that much. I sold Dad's watch and got a decent amount, so I've got a little money coming in. I couldn't help but intervene. Wait! Do you even understand how inheritance works? Why? If you sold Dad's belongings, you can't renounce the inheritance. What? Haven't you heard about simple acceptance? It means inheriting everything from the deceased, not just money but other possessions as well. If you make them your own or sell them, it's considered accepting the inheritance. So by selling Dad's watch, renouncing the inheritance is impossible now. Is that so? You have to take on the debt too. I could hear a scream from my mother over the phone. My mother was crying out, "What should I do?" while Kevin kept asking next to her, "What did she say? Tell me." My mother was in a panic, and it seemed my brother's voice wasn't reaching her at all. Unable to endure hearing my mother repeatedly muttering, "What should I do?" I ended the call. After a while, they contacted me asking for money. It seemed that the renunciation of the inheritance was not accepted. That's not surprising. After my father passed away, they immediately withdrew his savings to use for meals, and besides the watch, they had sold anything else that could make money. My mother's debt was nearly $200,000. Initially, she was repaying it with her part-time job earnings, but since my brother got hooked on going to the casino, the part-time job money wasn't enough, and they incurred significant losses. With poker, you might get some money back, but slots don't yield money at all. My mother had even asked him to stop playing slots, but my brother vehemently resisted, so she ended up continuing to pay. The brother, once considered a promising genius, now had no trace of that past. He didn't work, was addicted to gambling, and had become a fine freeloader, relying on his family. After my father's debts came to light, my brother had said, "Mom, work hard. If it's not enough, Jenny can pay the difference, which made me hit him 3 times. My brother resisted, but I held him down and slapped him hard while screaming inside, "Enough is enough." I braced myself for retaliation from my brother, but surprisingly, he didn't get angry at all. Rather, he seemed very shocked by this side of me he had never seen before. "I'm sorry," he apologized, trembling. Did I really scare him that much? Since I refused to help with the debt repayment, my mother and brother had no choice but to work. But in reality, only my mother was actually working. It seems she finally stopped giving my brother an allowance, but since he couldn't keep a job, my mother ended up supporting him. With this situation, repaying all the debts was utterly impossible. "I should have valued you more," my mother said, which made me burst out laughing. I can't believe she would say such a thing now. Unbelievable. I have already completed the renunciation of the inheritance, and I haven't told them that I've had a child or that we've moved. I've changed my phone number because I disliked getting calls from them. We are practically estranged. The next time I see them will probably be when my mother passes away. I haven't decided whether I will attend the funeral or not. Despite everything that has happened, I'm now enjoying life with my husband, daughter, and our 3 cats. It's a busy life, but it's fulfilling, and I'm very happy. I never thought family could be something so wonderful when I was living at my parents' home. I'm truly grateful for my husband and daughter who have brought me happiness. The cats we have were adopted from a pet adoption event that my daughter, who is interested in rescue activities, and I attended. Having not felt loved by my parents, I feel a special connection to these rescue cats who have faced similar fates. I'm proud that my daughter has grown up to be a compassionate person who shows interest in such kittens. The success in raising her might be because I've seen bad examples like my mother and brother. While there isn't much to thank them for, perhaps this aspect alone is something I might slightly appreciate.